Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today at Overcoming the Challenges of Selling Cybersecurity Services. I'm your host, four-time Microsoft MVP and former MSP owner, Nick Cavalancia. It's a really interesting topic today. Obviously, it's about the difficulty that MSPs like you go through trying to convince your customers to purchase cybersecurity, certainly in a place where they're thinking things like, it's never going to hit us, we're safe, or the aftermath won't be so bad. It's kind of an uphill battle for you to convince your customers that they need to be protected. Now, before we get into talking about today's webcast, as well as hear from our guest speaker, I'm just going to take one moment or two what the current state of cyber attacks look like. And the underlying premise here is just the fact that there are cybersecurity services that are really needed here. And sometimes industry data like this helps actually establish for customers the likelihood, the prevalence of cyber attacks, and that they do need to be paying attention to this. So first one here, I grabbed, this is from Coveware's quarterly ransomware report, and email still remains a primary initial attack vector. Obviously, every one of your customers is leveraging email to some degree as a primary forms of communication, more than likely. And that's an easy way, obviously, for cyber attackers to gain entrance into an organization. Second one here comes from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report from this year. And you can see here that a majority of data breaches involve what they call the human element. Now, in some cases, that might mean something like, let's say a user makes a mistake and they accidentally publish something out to the web. That's part of it. But the other part of it is things like users being involved in a cyber attack unwittingly in most cases where there's some kind of response necessary. And you've all seen this before, just something as simple as, let's say, a phishing attack with a malicious attachment, or maybe a malicious link, maybe wanting the user to respond somehow. That's a human element. There's always some human factor. The other thing to kind of note about this stat is that if we make the assumption that some of those human elements are users interacting with malware, malicious email, social engineering, those kinds of things, it means that they probably got all the way to the endpoint, which means the cybersecurity is not as strong as it should be, of course. Next one comes from CrowdStrike's Global Threat Report from this year. And you see almost 2/3 of cyber attacks now are completely malwareless. Just social, just links. They're going out to the web somewhere, generally speaking, trying to do things like gather credentials and then use those in a subsequent attack, something along those lines. Some cases just to sell the credentials to someone else who then will perform the attack. Another one here from IBM's Cost of a Data Breach report from this year. You'll see here that as an example of phishing attacks, the average attack, if you notice this is really important, 219 days to detect. They've been sitting on your customer's network for like well over 7 months, just looking around, that kind of thing. And then an additional 76 days to actually contain the threat. So you're talking almost not a year, but it's somewhere up in that range. It's almost, 9 months or something along those lines, just to, and the average to contain after identifying an attack. And then the last one here, this is from CyberCatch's small and medium-sized business ransomware report from this year. You see here that it's basically 75% of SMBs wouldn't survive any more than 7 days from a ransomware attack. Their operations are going to be completely gone. They won't survive the business. So this is a real issue, a real need. These are current stats from this year, kind of give you a state of what's going on here. Now, as we have up next is a wonderful speaker here that I really want to make sure we do some proper introductions for and to educate you on how you can overcome these challenges. It's Nadia Karatsorios. And I always say her name wrong, but she said it's literally carrots and Oreos. And that's it. So I was going to change my name to something to make fun of her, but she's been made fun of her entire life that she's been married. So I'll spare her that. But as you can see here, she's senior MSP growth strategist over at Malwarebytes. So Nadia, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I promise there will not be a spelling test on my last name at the end of today's webinar. So everybody rest easy on that.
Fair enough. Before we hand things over to Nadia, a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording today's webcast. You will receive an email afterwards a couple of days later from today with a link to it in case you have to jump off or you want to share it with a colleague, that sort of thing. As well as we do have Q&A. I have a Q&A box open here in front of me, and we will have some formal Q&A time at the very end of today's webcast. But Nadia, if it's okay with you, I would also like to offer to the audience, if those in the audience would like to ask a question that's maybe a little more contextually appropriate for while we're doing the presentation, that I might interject, Nadia, if that's okay. Yeah,
I would welcome that. I love that idea.
Cool.
Let's keep this as interactive as possible.
Yeah, as definitely that's the idea. And then if we don't get to your question because maybe maybe the conversation has just gone past at the moment, we'll definitely have it covered in the formal Q&A at the very end. So I think I've got everything covered. So with that, Nadia, why don't you go ahead and share out your screen, and I'll let you know when I can see it. And then
Sure.
once we do that, we'll move on from there.
Yeah. If you stop sharing yours, give
There we
me the
go.
opportunity. I will do that. And you should see it
Perfect.
now.
I can see your
Perfect.
screen. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us here today. As we've talked about, today's webinar is going to be extremely interactive. I welcome Nick as well if to be part of this conversation. So you're not just staring at PowerPoint slides, because I know over the
Happy
past
to.
2.5 years, we've been looking at a lot of PowerPoint slides on our screens. Let's make this a conversation. As we said, my name is Nadia Karatorios. There's a chance that I may have met some of you already sometime on the road or through a virtual event. I've been in the industry for almost 13 years, and I've always focused on helping MSPs grow. So my title just fits me perfectly now. So today we're talking to you, the MSP. And I have to say that you probably have one of the hardest jobs out there. And Nick, I know you're probably nodding your head in agreement, because
Mhm.
as an MSP, you're meant to be an entrepreneur, operator, educator, defender, technician, and that's just to name a few. It's one of the hardest roles you can have out there. And I believe that's why we have the community we do. I'm constantly at events or in forums and seeing peers helping each other out and sharing information. And that's where I've learned everything I've learned, is literally sitting at a table at lunch or reading some posts on forums, hearing what MSPs need, hearing how they help each other out. And that's kind of how we put together some of these tips and tricks today that we'll be going through. So we're going to talk about reaching profitability, because hey, that's why we're doing these things. That's why we work. Talking about education. And then I'm going to pass it over to the real rock star of today's event. And that's Mr. Jared Boyd, who'll be going through some of our security solutions, a recovery, and we'll be also here for answering all of the questions that we may have. So with that, we're going to get started. Nick, you ready?
I am. Let's do it.
Awesome. So the first tip I want to talk about is selling your pain. And we've all heard of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and talking to your customers about all the scary bad guys out there and all the bad things that can happen. I've given presentation over the year where I show a big tornado and a big fire that happens, and then we also we watch the news and we hear about all these cyber attacks that are happening. But when you're selling the pain, sell the pain that you may have as well. Like, you're a business owner too, so, or you work for a business, sell the pain that you have. The other thing is we tend to nerd out on all the very cool features, the speeds and feeds and all the cool technical features that we'll see in just a moment. But does your customer really care? Nick, as your experience as an MSP, did your customers care about those technical features?
No, and that's it's interesting. As IT professionals, we sort of run home to mama, and
Exactly.
we talk about what we do, meaning, oh, I can protect your email and I can block something at the firewall. We talk about what we do, but we don't talk about what we do for them. What is it doing for
Exactly.
them? And actually, what's interesting is the sort of first sub bullet of the first bullet, which says, sell the business value, not the technical features. I always say it this way: start with the business, work backwards to technology.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
typically it's having a conversation around Mr. and Mrs. Customer. What would it look like to you if a ransomware attack hit you and you were out for a couple of days? Oh, that would probably hurt our business. Okay. How many days do you think you could actually be, out of production completely until it really impacted you financially? Oh, that's 5 days or whatever number, doesn't matter, whatever number they come up with. And then that's what you start with. You start there. You talk about their business and what they care about, staying operational, staying productive, that sort of thing. And then
Absolutely.
selling the reality. And I like the concept of selling the pain from the standpoint of, not only do you all understand the pain yourself, whether again you're the business owner or working for the business, but you can also talk about, let me tell you, if we don't have protective services like this in place, and should something like this happen, this is what the response looks like from our business. It's going to take us this long to do X, Y, and Z, that kind of thing. And that's, I have to note this. I always say this whenever I'm talking about this, specifically to MSPs about cybersecurity. There's this really nice balancing act you're going to have to maintain, because if you don't pitch this correctly, it sounds like a shakedown.
Yes.
Think about it. You need to pay me $100 or something bad's really going to happen to you. You don't want to do that. That's horrible.
Yes.
But it can. So you've got to find a balance of saying this is the reality, and but you do that in the context of where they said I can't be down without without an X period of time. And if you're already selling, like, say, backup and recovery services or something, I would probably start there. You know how we do that for you? Yeah. And you know how we've got a recovery time objective of just an hour or 15 minutes or whatever you have set up for them? Yes. The reason why we did that was so you could remain operational. Okay. If there's a ransomware attack, though you start having those kinds of conversations, you start drawing into cyber attacks and cybersecurity in order to get them thinking the same way they thought about backups initially, which also probably 4, 5, 6 years ago sounded a bit like a scam. Like, why do I need backups? But now everyone has
Yes.
backups. Yeah. So long answer. Sorry, Nadia, but lots of
No,
thoughts.
that was great information. And
Yeah.
simulations again too. I've been a big believer over the years, like you mentioned, disaster recovery. Simulate what happens and how quickly we can get you back up and running. But again, don't get lost in those weeds of the technical side of things. What does it mean for their business? How quickly will they be up and running? Show how their screens can back up like nothing ever happened. Let them actually see what it looks like in real life. Use those real world examples. I did mention the whole fear, and you said, it feels kind of like that shakedown when we're talking about those bad guys. But the news is doing some advertising for us. They're talking about all these huge things happening, and 5, 6 years ago we heard about Amazon or Target, but now we're hearing small and medium-sized businesses are just as much at risk as those large companies. So use those real-world examples and make it make sense for their business. One thing as well we didn't talk about was table topics. I'm assuming here almost everybody is doing either a QBR or an annual business review. Have these table topics ready. So this is what's happened. This is what's going on, whether it's in their business, maybe it's something in the area, maybe it's something again that they've heard on the news, but have those topics ready to go and have the information again of how that would affect their business, not just how it affected the business that it actually happened to. So if this happened to you today, this is what it would look like, and this is how I can get you back up and running. All right, I think we're ready for number 2. This is upselling higher level services. So the classic question I've been hearing for years as I've been working with MSPs is, how should I package my solution? How do I sell more? Or what if I want to change things? How do I have those conversations? And there really is no magic here. There isn't something that works for everybody. There's different places in the world where things work. There's different tools that you offer. But the one thing again is, as talking back to their business, as you mentioned, Nick, was like, start with the business, how it's going to help them, whether it's going to help them be more productive or take away some of their pain. Start there and then work your way back. And if you are going to, let's say, be selling some new packages, make sure it's a package again that is built around their business and it's customized for them, because one size fits all doesn't always work. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree with the idea. There's no magic bullet because it just really depends. I've talked to MSPs that of late are just saying, well, I'm going to include, and they have some basic level, just with their RMM service as an example. And then others that are obviously trying to figure out ways to break these into, let's call it tiered offerings, where there's a good, better, best, which also ties back into the idea of trying to get pricing right. I always go back to like the movie popcorn theory. The small is $5.50 and it's like this big, and then the medium's a little better value, but the $7.50 for the big one is obviously a really good value. And it's just all done to get people to go to the thing. Now, the idea for you guys in the audience, of course, is something on the lines of, the best protection is, the large. It's the best of the good, better, best. But of course, some customers may not want to do that. So it's an interesting balance here because you'll probably have to package it in a way where if they don't get all of the protection, if you will, like they're just going to put, let's say, EDR on the endpoints, and that's it. But they're not going to go get email protection and security awareness training and a whole bunch of other things that all get packaged in, or whatever it is that you're going to include in your cybersecurity services. It's got to be something that still provides some value, to the customer. And at the same time, you probably would be smart to tell the customer like what the incident costs are going to be, so they at least eyes wide open understand that you're only getting some of the protection, and we're going to have to probably charge you in the back end if we have to fix a problem, and so on. And so just again, long-winded answer, but I hope that sort of adds some value here.
It's like selling insurance, right? So it's
exactly that.
That's right,
like
Jared,
I get people all the time. They're like, "Hey, I love this scanner. I use the scanner all the time. I want to buy the scanner." I'm like, it's not proactive, right? They're like, yeah, that's fine, but it's cheaper, right? So that's why they go for it. So then they end up with this awesome scanner that's going to remove threats after the threat is already attacked. And then they come back, they're like, so that ransomware attack cost us $120,000. Was there a way that we could have been proactive? Like, yeah, for the low cost of this, you could have been proactively protected, right?
Yeah,
you gotta it's hard to kind of walk them to water, because I understand budgetary concerns, and I deal with MSPs that deal with a variety of different customers, and you have to kind of walk in the water. Yes, it's going to cost you a little bit more for the email security, the offsite backups, the network monitoring, the endpoint protection, the EDR monitoring, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you less in the long run versus getting hit, right? You really got to
that's the rub is right there, is trying to get the customer to understand you can pay me $20 now a month, or you could pay $120,000 afterwards.
It sounds like a shakedown. It does.
It is. And I've even had MSPs that have forms that are indicating that the customer is declining services, to make sure they understand what you're declining, which again feels more like a shakedown, but it's necessary. And that's where education is going to come in. I know you're going to talk about that, Nadia, but that's really kind of important.
Yeah. And it's actually on the screen there. You'll see that use the CYA, which is cover your bleep letter, and that
assets, your assets, cover your assets.
Exactly. So that is exactly that, where I'm seeing more and more MSPs use this, where we told you should do this, you sign this, because if it happens, which more than likely it will, it's not covered under my usual services. So we will help you. We'll help you get back up and running, but now you're going to be project hours, which is this much money. And it's something, again, that maybe feels uncomfortable for some. If you've had this client for a long time and you feel uncomfortable having this conversation, talk to some other MSPs, email one of us. We have tons of experience with it. And the other thing that came to mind while you folks were speaking there was a study I read just a couple of years back, where it said that most humans, if they see a gold, silver, bronze, or a good, better, best package, we tend to go to the middle, because we don't want to be too cheap, and the entry level one feels like it doesn't cover enough. But we're so concerned about budgets, and that most expensive one, I don't know if I'm going to get my CFO or my owner to approve it. So let's go for that middle one, because it feels good. I was reading a whole study about that, and then I thought, do we just make that the most appealing one because we know that's where humans go? Do we make that the one that we expect most of our clients to go with, only because by human nature, most of the time, that's where we'll go? And again, I've been the person at the movie theater that says, I don't know if I want to have that big popcorn, and that little one, I'll be done before the previews are done. So maybe that medium size is the right one. So I'll admit that I've been part of that. I see we have a couple of questions. Anything?
Yeah.
Anyone
they're not
there?
entirely. So it's interesting. So Tom here is mentioning that his business mentions cybersecurity as being a function of management and not IT. And in some ways it really is, because it's not about keeping the business, but like you think about, well, we're going to put you in the cloud, or we're going to manage your office, Microsoft 365 services, or those are about keeping the business like moving. Right. And then cybersecurity isn't. So I kind of like that perspective, where it's really more about the function of management. Like, we need to, what things we have to have as infrastructure to keep the business running. And it's not really about IT maintaining it. Because obviously, in some cases with cybersecurity, if there's no attacks and all the solutions do their job, it is sort of set it and forget it, sort of.
Yes, sort of.
But then Tom goes on to say, it's IT's mandate to follow the directions of management, who must make the hard decisions of how much is enough, which translates to how much to spend. And he says, do you think that this level of transparency is a good idea? And I kind of like that, because in pitching it that way, it aligns with Nadia what you and I both said, which is starting with the business and not really make it about technology, because this isn't this, you know, it's obviously a very different pitch than if you're saying, oh, I got these brand new laptops for the users. It's super fast, has 24 gigs of RAM and super processor, and the GPU is awesome, so the graphics look amazing, and you're trying to sell them the wares and how it's going to benefit the user that way. That's not the same conversation you're having here. This is just like, should something happen, we're protecting you and you've got something in place. It's much like selling car insurance or anything else. But I mean, any thoughts, Nadia, Jared?
Yeah, I definitely, I love that idea again, because by making it a management, by making it infrastructure, it's something you have to have. It's almost like, you know, paying the electricity bill or paying for internet. It's paying for the cybersecurity protection. So I absolutely agree with it.
It's not optional anymore.
Yeah,
It's not.
exactly.
It's just not like it used to be. It used to be you could like opt out and be like, whatever comes stock on the machine's good enough. You know, I'll handle it on the back. Can't do it anymore. Not with security.
No.
Not with the amount that we're getting hit. It's not. You know, it's not these one-off incidents anymore, right? And it's not this. You know, we get the reports. I mean, we get telemetry all day, every day, and build out these threat reports, much like CrowdStrike and the rest of the guys. And it's not targeted attacks so much because you'll talk to a lot of mom and pops that'll say, well, you know, I just own a pizza place, I'm not going to get hit, no one's going to target me. It's like they don't care. They're targeting
They don't know you're a pizza place. You're an IP
Exactly
address
that.
with an open port on. That's all they care about.
Exactly. It's just the shotgun effect, right? You got with TrickBot. When TrickBot came back alive this year, you know, it was schools, it was healthcare, it was manufacturing. It didn't matter what vertical, they all got hit. So it's really, and it's become easier, especially with like NIST, for instance, to go to these people and be like, as you can see, it's no longer a, you know, I'm not going to get it. I'm going to opt out. To no, you have to have it. And you're running into cyber risk insurance companies, same, that are telling you like, you have to have an EDR. You cannot just have an old school, you know, traditional AV. You have to have EDR. You have to do email security. So there's
a question on that, Jared, real quick. Just I want to interject because it's about that. Kathy's asking, how do you handle the insurance requirements that some clients have when wanting to do an assessment? And that becomes really interesting because no two cyber insurers have exactly the same requirements. They never usually grant things like EDR, MFA, you know, backup and recovery. But then beyond that, they're still trying to figure it out. It's a bit of the Wild West in some ways. But what have you seen?
I've seen everything. I've seen cyber security companies that are not vendor agnostic, that are like, you have to go with CrowdStrike, you have to go with SentOne. You know, I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. It's very odd to see that. But and again, you'll see a difference. Like, oh, well, you have to have EDR, that's a given. But like, you know, email security, you know, can you get by with like the free version of whatever you're running? It is kind of Wild West. How we handle it, whenever someone asks about cyber risk insurance, when I'm talking to them, I'm like, what are the requirements for the specific company that you're working with? What do they say you have to get, right? Because as Malwarebytes, we don't do everything, right? We're not like, you know, not to rip on a company, we're not like SolarWinds or, you know, we don't do every single little thing. We have a niche that we're in. So I always ask my customers, like, well, what do you need? What tool sets do you need? You know, and here's what I can offer, what Malwarebytes can do, but we can't do X, Y, Z. These, you know, you're going to want to find other companies that can do that, you know, versus, and that makes for a tough sell because everyone wants to hear, oh, your company can do it all, right? But I always tell people, when you're dealing with a company that says they can do it all, it's kind of like having a Swiss Army knife, right? And they're great, awesome, cool. I have a toothpick, I got a corkscrew, I got a knife. Would you ever eat a steak with a Swiss Army knife?
If you had to.
If you had to, but that wouldn't be your choice, right? Same with
good analogy.
It's same with security. So when these insurance companies come in and they say, you know, they have requirements, what are the requirements? You know, and then you kind of have to build up a pool of, well, here are the different different vendors we can go with. We can build up kind of those options that you were talking about, Nick, like better, best, bet, or you know, good, better, best options. Yeah, and that's kind of the way you got to do it. That's what I'm seeing people do, right? It's like, here's your whole kit and caboodle where we're literally being your SOC and maintaining everything, versus like, here's your DIY kit, your Pinewood Derby car, if you will. You build it yourself. We're just giving you the options we're giving you the tools, but you have to build it and take care of it yourself, maintain it yourself.
And one of the challenges that'll come into play with that, and Nadia, what you've got on the screen is the second major bullet, the benefits of a higher level service. One of the challenges that you and the audience will face is, let's say you're going to go the path of just pure math to try and sell better services. And the analogy here is going to be like, let's say AWS or Azure or something, when they're selling, let's say, disk services from an availability standpoint. So what they're going to promote is, like, depending on the tier of storage you'd use in the cloud, and there's a direct relation here. So go with me for this tangent for a second. They'll literally say, well, for this particular type of storage, you'll have 5 nines of availability. And on this one, you get 7 nines of availability, and so on. And 5 nines availability is like 6.5 minutes or something of downtime a year. And then 7 nines is down into the seconds and so on. If you were to do that same thing and apply it to cybersecurity, and you were to say, well, let's put the EDR solution in, I don't know this for a fact, but I would probably almost guarantee you, if you were to ask Jared, and I'm not putting you on the spot, Jared, but if you ask Jared, he either knows or could figure out pretty fast, like, okay, our ADR solution will block out 90-something% of all the malware that comes through. And then you go, great, so you have that. See, what was it, Jared?
98.9.
I see. There you go. So that's what I just knew he'd have it, because that's how they think. So, and then on top of that, you go, oh, but then we have this other service that blocks out another, 78.3% of the stuff that the other stuff blocks. And if you add all these things up and did the math, you're adding on your higher level services are going from 98.9 to 99.3, and then 99.3 to 99.7. And then it gets a little ridiculous with your customers going like, what's wrong with 98.9%? And we all know the answer is like, you don't want that even that one getting through, because exactly. Jared says 120 grand, that's the cost. And so that would be the challenge, where you're going to have to really probably sell them on how cyber attacks happen, and that threat actors are actively looking at this as a business, and they are literally testing. I'll make this up. Let's say they're taking Malwarebytes EDR or any other vendor's EDR, for the sake of conversation, and testing out their malware against to see if they can figure out how to evade detection on it. And so one solution isn't the answer. That's why it has to be a multifaceted approach. And that's where educating your customer on this is going to be so necessary. So I hope I'm not stealing any thunder, Nadia.
No, it's actually a perfect segue.
And I knew that, so that's why I mentioned it. So no,
it was all planned. This is sell the future now. And that's the other thing, is this is a journey. And I feel like a lot of people are starting to understand that in our space, but your customers, your end users, the SMBs you work with don't quite know that yet. So it is a journey. Things are constantly changing. As I said in the beginning, that's another thing that makes your job so difficult, is that nothing's really consistent. You do need to be agile. You need to understand what's happening, and you need to share that with your customers. And that's why the awareness message is so important, and having that training is so important. I hear all the time, how do I keep my customers up to date? How do I keep those managers who can then enforce it with their teams? It's just providing that information, making it part of your package. We talked about the packages a lot here. The good, better, best. Every package that you offer should have some type of training, whether that's an infomercial that you send over email every once in a while, whether maybe it's training like a lunch and learn. You bring in pizza every quarter and you have an update on what should be happening. And again, to have that conversation on who's going to be responsible for having good cyber hygiene, who's going to be responsible. Well, if it's going to be you, then that's part of the package you're offering, and you need to have buy-in from everybody at the company. What do you both think about that?
I'll jump in on the cybersecurity awareness for a moment. Security awareness training is especially if you've got some with like a phishing testing. We can send a fake email, that sort of thing, out to the customer. I have no idea which vendors do and don't have that. I'm not the expert in that, but that is like the only time that the customer actually gets a feedback loop to figure out where their risk is.
Yes.
And that's what is really strong when it comes to adding that on as a portion of the cybersecurity, is not only am I going to protect you, but I can tell you where you're weak.
Yes. Yeah.
it's John in accounting. That guy clicks on everything, whatever it is. And so that's something that's like super important, because you don't get that kind of feedback loop ever to see if something is working, other than you can show your customer reports of all the things that you stopped and that sort of thing. But then they can kind of go, but we never got attacked before. So I don't understand. So there's
Yes.
it's an interesting there, but it's important there. That's the first thing I'd mention.
It ain't broke, don't fix it. That kind of mentality, which is
Got to avoid that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
which is why WannaCry happened, which is why a lot of these major attacks, the JBS was the meatpacking facility, the Colonial Pipeline,
Mhm.
that's, and a lot of it's just like they don't bother fixing these things. Like I run into machines all the time that are like, well, why is this one showing so many detections? Oh, it's a Windows 10 box that hasn't been updated since 2013, right? Because why would they? It's just sitting there doing its job all day. It's like a print server. It just sits there, right? They're not doing it. It doesn't change. And it kind of getting to Nathan's point in the Q&A, it's like, there's he's running into a lot of businesses who don't see a need for cybersecurity. How do you convince them to be compliant with these laws and kind of figure it out without actually like attacking them, right? That's anyone who's who's into cybersecurity. Anytime someone says no to you, you're like, I'm just gonna hit you with a phishing email. Like, I'm just gonna smash you with a phishing email, and then you're gonna learn the hard way. Can't do that legally, right?
Yes.
So
It's not the right thing to do.
it's you get ethics and all that nonsense. Tell them like, just go to coinhive.com real quick and see.
I'm waiting for one of you to go, you definitely should not do that. Don't ever do that at all.
Too many legal ramifications. Never do that. But trying to convince them, you just have to show examples. Like that's the only way, and beat it into their head over and over and over and over again.
Let me add into that just a practical business way of doing this, both for Nathan and anybody else who's either you've just pitched a customer and they say, no, thanks. That's fine. They said, no, thanks. Great. Or Nathan's saying he's got a lot of businesses just don't see the need in the area that he's at, is you turn that as an opportunity to do marketing. And it might be that you go and you try and curate a number of articles that are literally to a Google News. You go to google.com/alerts, you put in a term for the news, it'll send you an email every day. And you could look like, cyber attack and SMB. I'm making this up kind of off the top of my head, but that's the idea. And start putting, let's say, a monthly newsletter out or a weekly or something. Just start educating them, because when you came over and you're like, oh, well, I got these stats from Nick and he said, all the stats he covered on the slide and and that's how bad it is. And they're like, yeah, you're just trying to pitch me and get me to buy some stuff. It's a shakedown. Instead, now you go, no, this is real. This is happening every day, more and more to businesses. There's great fodder out there for
tons of
MSPs that want to convince an SMB that SMBs are still targets. And the reality is, if there's any of you that are thinking the SMB isn't as much a target, because the stories we always hear of, like, you've heard, like, even Jared mentioned, like WannaCry and Caracut and Conti and all these other types of sort of well-known household names in our industry. There are just like any other business, there are practitioners, the cyber threat practitioners, if you will, the bad guys, who are going, all right, what's a market no one's attacking, so we can kind of corner the market. I mean, think if you were a lawn care service and you just did homes, and you notice that nobody in your city did like businesses, you might go, I think I might start targeting businesses, because no one's targeting businesses in my city, so I'm going to take that business. Same concept. Everyone seems to be going after, in the cyber attack world, again, over big companies. So I'm going to skip the big companies. What small niche could I get really good at? Get a team of people that's good at social engineering those people. How about law firms? Yeah, let's go after law firms. And that's literally the thinking. And they're going, let's keep practicing at it. Let's improve our game and figure out what systems they normally have and what security they normally have and what social engineering tactics will work. I mean, this is literally how it works. It's a business like any other. They're trying to figure it out. And so that's why educating your customer is so important over a period of time. You try it on the pitch. Great. If that doesn't work, you got to start incorporating some stories about things and recommendations, so that there's some presented thought leadership that how to address this issue. It's not just a bunch of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that kind of thing. So
That's the key though, is that thought leadership. You know, you got to be a thought leader for these people, right? Because I've been on so many calls, and of course I'm a sales engineer, right? So my job is to help sell. But I've been on calls where you'll run into those objections, you know, like just the no's. They have no real
Hmm.
good reason other than they just said, nah, I don't want it. No. And I've literally got to the point of like wanting to tear my hair out, just saying, I don't care if you buy us. I don't care if you pay any money, just something. Clam AV, it's free. Anything. Just do something, please. You know, patch your machines at least. You know,
Yes.
and then showing examples. You know, going in and being like, go to Brian Krebs. You know, go to Krebs on Security.
Hmm.
Go to the
Mhm.
Hacker News. Go to Google. Just Google. You know, and look to see how much money is being removed from these SMBs, and then again going way back to what we're talking about. How long could they deal? Like if I talk to a small business, it's like, how long could you pay $100,000 ransom? You know, how much, if you were down for 3 days, how would that affect you? You know, and again, like I don't care if you purchase. Like
Yeah.
I don't. I just want you to be protected because you're the same people that I get reports on all day to look at threat landscapes, right?
Mhm.
So it's like I just it's a scary world, and you have to reiterate that, and you have to do so like on the sales side as like a friend. You know, you got to come in.
Hmm.
I know we're all here to, you know, sell, right? Obviously, to, you know, as an MS, MSP, I'm trying to sell and get a client, but sometimes you're going to run into those stubborn people who are like, no, I got Ted, the IT guy, who's my cousin's nephew's brother, and you know he keeps me super secure with my yearly update of my
Good
machine.
for you and Ted. Yeah, go
Exactly.
for it.
So you have to convince them like, hey, that's great, you know, I'm really happy about Ted, but you know, here's what's going on in your industry, what's going on in your area. Is there any way we can help you? Right, that's a big thing that we run into. Again, we
Yep.
get Malwarebytes gets downloaded 500,000 times a day. You think we're not getting telemetry off those machines? We do.
Mhm.
So when a company downloads us 1,000 times in a month, we know. And one of the tactics we used to go is we'd call those people up and be like, hey, what's going on? You know, why you've been downloading us? You can go in and come as a helper. Like, hey, you're downloading the wrong product. How can we help you? You know, make this job easier for you and keep you protected. You know, and save you money in the long run, right? Because again, not only on the security front, you got to think with these customers you're selling to. That's cool that Ted is doing all the his yearly updates or whatever. How much are you paying Ted to do that? How
Yep.
long does it take Ted to do that? That's another thing you can think of. Not only are you trying to secure their environment, keep them from a ransomware attack per se, but also how much money, how much ease of use are you offering? You know, if you can make their day a little bit easier, you've the ROI is right there, right?
Absolutely. It's priceless. And this actually
Exactly.
reminds me, and I hope I get this right. There was an industry event earlier this week. There was an assistant director at the cyber division of the FBI, and he was on stage, and there was a fireside chat going back and forth with the CISO of this company. And the one thing I remember from the conversation was 80% of all cyber risks can be mitigated by three things: patching, password protection, and being aware of phishing attacks. So educating on phishing attacks. Those three things, 80% could be mitigated. And that
Mm.
really hit home because to me, 80% is pretty high. And those are three things that we talk about all the time, but are we talking to the end users, the SMBs about that? I know we talk about it a whole bunch within our community, but are we relaying that message? And that really hit home for me. That's one of the things I brought home. So
Yeah,
with
and
that, I know
those are things you can offer. You know,
exactly.
those are things you could easily offer. Like, hey, we can help you guys with, you know, pen. I think Jeff had brought it up, like pen testing in the chat, right? We can help
Hmm.
you
Mhm.
guys with pen testing. We can help you with know before and sending out phishing emails. We can help you with, you know, updating and patching your machines using our various RMMs that are out there. We can help you with, you know, various antivirus products or EDR products. These are all things you can help to, you know, give that 80% to them without them having to
Exactly.
do all that extra work, right?
Exactly. It's all that conversation that you're having again. And I know we've repeated this lots of times, bringing it back to their business. Speaking of business, Malwarebytes for MSPs. Everybody I talk to says, I know Malwarebytes. I've known them for years. I know you guys have helped me get out of a jam many times. Not a lot of people know that we have a program, a platform that Jared's about to show us that's built all for MSPs. There's over 2,000 MSPs using us today, and that number is growing. And that's the reason why I'm here with you today and why I'm working for Malwarebytes, is to spread the good word. Jared mentioned telemetry. We have tons of information that we want to help you. Like, our whole goal here is to help you, help them, not to sound like a movie quote, but it's really to help you help them. And we want to show you more about that today. And that's when I'm going to pass my screen. I'll let you just kind of explain this, Jared, and then I'll pass the screen over to you for the demo.
Oh, cool. We're talking about products. All right, let's
Mhm.
go. So looking at this screen real quick, you know, it's kind of a breakdown of the product line. Obviously, you guys know Malwarebytes from scanning. If there are people on here that don't, it's shocking, but maybe you're using Hitman Pro, maybe you're using something else, right? So the scanner has always been known. The idea is to go in, if someone has a existing solution, you can go run a scan and be like a janitorial service, clean up the machine, any artifacts that may be left over. You know, that's great. So Malwarebytes has grown up over the years. Obviously, we released an anti-malware product years ago, then we released an anti-exploit product, then an anti-ransomware product, and then we had our EDR product. We now have everything kind of hosted under one roof, so it's a single unified agent that you can then offer in 3 different kind of main categories to an end user or to a client. So incident response, that's just the scanner. So if you're talking to an existing customer who's already running like a CrowdStrike, a SentOne, you know, Sophos, you know, insert name here of AV, you can still offer them that scanning capability, because we're still running into that a lot. People will be running those other solutions. They're still having to run scans. They're still having to reimage machines. You know, that can help save them a little bit of time. The next step up, endpoint protection, that's Malwarebytes next gen AV. And I say AV, I know AV is like a dead term nowadays. Like, viruses are so rare. It's just malware and ransomware, but it's kind of an umbrella term, right? So when I say next gen AV, I mean, you know, we're going after ransomware, adware, spyware, malware, viruses, worms, you name the category, we're kind of going after it. And when you hear next gen, that's another term that gets abused too much by marketing. You know, next gen, X gen, I think Cisco calls theirs Y gen, because they got to be different. There's machine learning, deep learning, AI, whatever. The idea is to go after the unknown, right? How do you do that? So a lot of companies, what they'll do is they'll take uploads from like VirusTotal, which is a kind of a repository of known bad threats, and they'll feed it into their engines, and they'll say, go look for anything that acts similar to this. Now that's great, but depending on the vendor, some are a little bit more aggressive than others. So some will be like, hey, I know encryption is indicative of a ransomware attack, therefore anything that does encryption, go kill it. Whoops, I ran into a problem because now BitLocker doesn't work, or Cronus doesn't work, or Carbonite doesn't work. You end up with a higher false positive rate. Now, as a Malwarebytes, we can't do that, because you guys can go download our product anytime. You know, we're running it on millions of machines, from, you know, literally individuals to all the way up into enterprise. So the way that we do ours is utilizing that telemetry. And actually, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I can actually kind of give you some insight into that. Let's go into here. So this is a fun little graph. So we get telemetry off of every single machine. This is just the US that I'm looking at right now, but this is global that I can get this information. And each one of these machines is basically run a Malwarebytes scan, has a detection, and then it'll even tell you, like, you know, what was found and what other, you know, what other AV was installed on the machine at the time, right? These machines, yeah, it helps with the competitive analysis. I can go in and be like, Palo Alto is terrible with Trojans, but they're amazing with, you know, anti-exploit technology. I can kind of compare and contrast, and that's great. But I can also go in, and on these machines, I'm getting certain information, like what processes are there, what applications are installed, what file types are there. And then our research and dev teams can utilize that information to then build that into our AI engines. So what we'll do is take like a known bad, like say Word document, a known good Word document, we'll find the outlier, what's the difference between the two, and then we train our machine learning on that. And what that's led to is our product has about a 99.89% detection rate of unknown and known variants, which is a great track record, but we've also kept that false positive rate low, less than 1%, which means you can just download Malwarebytes, install it, and you don't have to worry about, is it going to crash all of my internal systems? right? That's a huge benefit, especially when it comes to like deploying out fast. Like if you guys need to get this put out there, it's as simple as you download it, you install it. And I'll show you guys a little bit more of that in just a second. We'll hurry up through here. And then the last one's EDR. EDR, it's because we're not perfect, right? We talked about CYA earlier. That's kind of what EDR is in the industry. EDR is the idea of visibility, right? So if you think of endpoint protection and these first 7 layers, web protection down to ransomware mitigation, as your locks on your doors, locks on your windows, the gate in front of your house, the guard dog, right? It's meant to keep the threat from getting onto the machine and actually infecting your machine. Awesome. But what if something gets through? Like, what if? No one's infallible. Like I said, there's always like a 0.01% chance something could happen. So what if? So we have, with our EDR platform, we've stapled it on top of our existing endpoint protection platform, and its job is to act like a security camera or a motion sensor, right? So if something gets through, what we start to do is record what's going on in the machine. We baseline the machine. This is what the machine is expected to do as normal. Anything new that pops up, we start monitoring and looking at it. And then we have a list of well over 500 different rules that follow the MITRE tactics and techniques that if we see any of those triggered, we raise our hand. We say, hey, this is a threat, or a potential threat, I should say, suspicious. So like, example.exe kicked off, I'm monitoring it. Oh, it made a connection to a URL over Tor, or it opened up or ran PowerShell script and did data gathering command line, or disabled control panel, whatever it may be. That would flag. And then you, as the MSP, could set it up Malwarebytes to get a notification and let you know. That way you could jump in and actually investigate the threat. And then you could take action. You could isolate the endpoint. So you could lock them out of the network. You could lock the end user out of their machine, or you could block processes from spawning. You could then go in and remove that potential threat. Or you could say, oh, it's no big deal. It's let me whitelist that and ignore it, right? And that's things that you can do. Coming in October, we actually are going to be releasing an MDR solution. MDR is just managed detection and response. So say I wanted to have a force multiplier, right? Well, if something happens at 3 a.m., I'm not going to be up. So I need someone to take action for me, right? Or I need someone to give me a detailed report of what happened and then give me the best options for how I should proceed moving forward. That's where Malwarebytes MDR would come in handy. So that'll be a service that will be available to the MSPs coming in October, right? So the spiel, you have the 3 main categories of Malwarebytes. They're all the same unified agent, and then they communicate to what we would call Nebula. Nebula is a management console. If you were an individual company, like Jared Boyd LLC, I would be able to get Malwarebytes Endpoint Protection or Malwarebytes EDR, and then I would get login for my Nebula. That's where I control all my endpoints. All my controls are right there. As an MSP, I need to be able to have multiple Nebulas, right? Each one for a different client. So that's where OneView, Malwarebytes OneView that you're looking at right here, comes into play. OneView allows me to break each of my customers down into a specific site. Right, so each one of these sites, Australia Site 1, if I hit launch site, that brings me into Australia Site 1's Nebula, right? So right now I'm within Nebula for that location, right? So each one of these different subscription, like which product line are they actually on? You know, you can go in and actually set that up and say, well, I need to manage the subscription. So which devices am I installing on? Which protection levels do they need on or off? You can even do split licensing if you want to. So like, well, 5 machines will have EDR. The rest of the machines will run endpoint protection. It's really up to whatever your customer needs are. We even have add-ons. So Malwarebytes, again, you have those 3 core product lines, and then we're doing these additional add-ons or modules, right? So vulnerability and patch management. Vulnerability will literally go look, see what software is installed on all the machines, and then tell you if there's any active CVEs. Are there any active vulnerabilities for those versions that are currently installed? Patch management will allow me to then go install or update those third-party applications or operating systems. So I was talking about that Windows 10 machine that hasn't been updated since like 2013. I can now handle that, right? I can take care of that remotely. And DNS filtering. DNS filtering, it's really as simple as that. We're filtering out, and you can build out these various rules. So let's just do DNS rule example, select a site. Let's do Australia site 1. You know what? I could just go, yes, leave. Let's go find this DNS rule. There we go. So I can actually go in and block based on categories if I want to. So I could say, hey, block things that are tied to DNS tunneling, phishing, malware. I can do things like block categories, content categories, right? So like some of these are a little bit weird, but some of the traditional, like adult themes, gambling, violence, safe for kids. You don't want the kids going to see the Wiggles. You don't want people going to certain weather sites, right? I'm going to actually enable that one. Going next, I can do allow list. I said weather, but maybe I want to allow them to go to like, AccuWeather. I can add that to an allow list. Or you can be specific. You can add to block list. Like, I don't want anyone to go on TikTok.com. So this kind of ruling, I'm finding this to be really important to like schools, right? So like schools are really liking this because when you have a laptop or a company asset, like with the laptop I'm talking to you guys on right now, it was always a nightmare for me coming from the network monitoring world is when you're in my network, I have control of you. I can see everything you're doing. I can control everything you're able to go to, etc. When someone goes home, right, when they're working remotely, I don't have access to your Belkin router. I don't have access to your Netgear that you bought at Best Buy 18 years ago, right? I need to be able to control that still. So this allows you to have that control regardless of where they are, right? So that would be the DNS filtering. But within OneView, not only can I go to individual sites, like I went to Australia site 1, right? I can go in here and I could say, hey, I want to go run a scan on this machine, right? That's fun to do for all of 5 seconds. I don't expect you guys to ever be doing this. You guys can just set up scheduled scans and say, go run once a day, right? The active protections are always going to be running. If anything suspicious happens, you can jump in and then you can further investigate what occurred, right? Don't be scared, giant process graph. I know this is what you'd see with an EDR solution. They're going to give you a process graph like this, right? And then you can dig through it and you can see exactly what this thing did. So it kicked off a sub process, it kicked off command line, kicked off con host, right? And then I would expect you guys to be, security professionals and dig through this and figure out if it was a threat or not. No, it's a nightmare. No one wants to do that. So Malwarebytes made it easy, right? It's color coded for Christ's sake. So you come in here, why is this thing a potential threat? Oh, it created an auto run. It disabled desktop. It disabled control panel. It tells you exactly what happened. And then very quickly I say, yeah, this is a threat. Get rid of it. Action, remediate. I don't have to remote into the machine. I don't have to manually kill anything. I can just say remediate, and Malwarebytes is going to rip this thing out root and stem. Right? It's really that simple. And that's how we've really designed it. Again, it's all about ease of use. If I want to get Malwarebytes today, you contact us. We give you access to OneView. You then come in, you create a brand new site. So one of your clients, you go down to downloads. You say, hey, I want to install an Australia site 1. It builds out your installer. I use GPO, SCCM, PDQ deploy, Terra. List goes on. We have various RMMs that we do actively work with. I go do my installs, and then I'm off to the races at that point, right? So again, if you guys have any questions about Malwarebytes as far as the MSP platform or anything like that, feel free, shoot me out an email, contact us. We'll more than willing to jump through like a full-length demo, do some trials, and get you guys started on that. It's really simple.
Jared, there was a question from Jennifer in the audience asked, are you able to hold or remove patching, or is it a manual process?
It's so you can't remove patches yet. That's something like patching rollback. That's something that we haven't really seen a lot of. We see what people doing like shadow copies, but we're currently investigating a way to be able to do a rollback of patches. I think that's aimed for, I think it's like December-ish, rough estimate there, folks. Don't hold me to that. But December-ish is when they were talking about that. But as far as scheduling it, yes, I can go through and I can manually update software, right? So let's not do it based on site. Good, there's no new patches available. Great, love that. There's for applications. Good, good, good. So I could go in, I can manually go through and update software, and that's a nightmare. Or I can go through and schedule it, all right? Come in, build a schedule. I'm going to do a install operating system patches, and then you can do the categories, right? So instead of telling the machines to do all of it, you could say, yeah, I just want the security updates to be updated, right? So you can edit that. You can make that a little bit more granular, and you could do it for the various sites, right? You could do it across everything, or you can do it across individuals. And that's for the patch management portion. Again, just making it easier. A lot of people have in-house applicate like Avanti Manage Engine, right? Or SCCM. And they're like, this is great, but when they're home and not VPN'd in, I can't really do anything. So this gives you another avenue to be able to go reach out to that machine that you couldn't see before. But great question. Any other questions?
No other questions. We've got about 3 minutes left, just to give you a time count.
Okay.
But no, there's one other question that came out. Nadia, it's actually for you. You had mentioned this before. Charles is just asking again, what were the 3 things that help eliminate 80% of the problems? You mentioned patching was one. What were the other 2?
Yeah, it was password protection. So having the right password protection in place, which again, we've been talking about for years. And then phishing education. So we touched on that earlier, where you're making sure that your customers know what to look for. You send those pretend or fake phishing emails and find out who's actually clicking on things they're not supposed to. So if you cover those 3 things, 80% of those cyber risks will be mitigated.
Yeah, love that. So it looks like we got all the questions answered, and we are about a minute and a half away. So maybe we'll let class out a little early. Anything to add,
Yes,
Nadia, to finish up?
absolutely. The only thing is what you see on the screen here. If you have any other questions, you want to find out about our MSP partner program, you want to dig in a little bit deeper on some of our new modules that are coming out, there's my little commercial for the day. We do have some really cool things coming out really soon. We have different ways to buy. We mentioned how we work with those other vendors. A lot of them have marketplaces, so you could buy from them if you prefer. We also have a special promotion just for you. So if you email that email address you see on the screen, you mentioned that you attended this webinar, we'll let you know all the things you need to know, but especially let you know what that special promotion is.
Sounds good. And we had one last question came in here. Actually, 2 of them that are related to more about the webinar. Someone who's anonymous had missed the beginning. You'll be sent an email with a link to the recording, so you'll get that. And Charles asked about PDFs of the slide deck being available. I don't know the answer to that, so I'll make sure that someone from Big Red Media actually reaches out to you, make sure that we get your question answered, and maybe get you a copy of that, or maybe it's included in the email. I'll talk to the folks that be.
And if for any reason, if there's anything specific you wanted us to cover, if there was anything specific you wanted me to send over, send an email there. Again, let us know where you attended, and they'll get a hold of me. They know where to find me.
I'm sure they do. Hey, Jared, Nadia, thank you both for a great presentation. Obviously, we had a lot of really good back and forth. The audience, I think, enjoyed it. Just a lot of good participation. So we appreciate all of you joining us today. This is going to conclude today's webcast. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.